Okay, so have you ever, like, listened to a podcast and thought, man, I could totally do that. Like, I would be a great guest, you know?
Mm.
Turns
That
out
goal.
there's a whole strategy behind it.
Yeah, there is.
It's not as easy as just showing up and hoping for the best.
Like anything else, a little strategy can go a long way.
Totally. So that's what we're diving deep into today.
Absolutely.
We've got a stack of research here on how to make podcast guesting like a really powerful part of your content strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And get this, the research on podcast growth is pretty wild.
It is.
It seems like everybody's listening these days.
Absolutely, yeah. In the U.S. alone, we're talking about millions of active podcasts.
Wow.
And over 66 million people who are regularly tuning in.
Wow, that's huge.
It's become a major way people consume information and entertainment.
So it's not even just about you being on a podcast. It's about what happens after the recording stops.
Right.
That's where things get really interesting.
Exactly. Think of your podcast appearance as just the beginning.
Okay.
Like this one conversation can be broken down and repurposed to create blog posts, social media snippets. You can even get video content out of it.
Oh, wow.
It's actually fascinating how much mileage you can get from a single interview these days.
Yeah, that's so smart. Well, the article we were looking at actually cited a study by Nielsen, and apparently podcast ads led to a 12% higher purchase intent.
Wow.
Compared to traditional ads.
Really?
Yeah, 12%.
Wow.
Why do you think that is?
I think it all comes down to trust.
Yeah.
You know, listeners build relationships with the host that they follow. So when a host recommends something, or a guest shares some really valuable insight, it carries more weight than a typical ad.
Right. It feels more genuine.
Exactly. It feels like a genuine endorsement.
Yeah, and people are more likely to trust a recommendation from someone they already feel like they know.
Right.
Even if it's just through a podcast.
Exactly.
Okay, so that makes total sense. But how do we actually do this? Like the article mentioned a bunch of tools, right?
Yeah, like there are a lot of tools out there like Opus
Okay.
and Recast Studio. These are all platforms that help you create shareable audio clips or even video snippets from your podcast episode.
Wow.
And, you know, you don't have to be a tech whiz to do it either.
Oh, good.
They're designed to be super user-friendly, even for people who aren't video editing experts.
That's awesome. And then once you have those clips, you can use scheduling tools like Buffer
Exactly.
to get that content in front of the right people at the right time.
It's all about maximizing your reach and making sure your message is seen or heard, I guess, by as many people as possible.
Yeah, that's smart. Well, they actually had a case study in the article about someone named Nikki Avram, who's been like incredibly successful with this.
Yeah.
Apparently, she used all these tactics to turn one podcast interview into like a multi-platform content strategy.
Right.
She's engaging her audience across like multiple platforms without having to start from scratch every single time.
It's brilliant. Nikki's strategy is brilliant because she understands the importance of consistency and making sure her content is tailored to each specific platform.
It's so smart. This all sounds amazing, but I'm not going to lie, it also sounds like a lot to manage.
Well, that's where strategy comes in.
Okay.
And that's especially true when we're thinking about which podcast to appear on.
Right.
You wouldn't just go on any podcast, would you?
No, definitely not.
Like appearing on just any old show isn't enough.
Right. You need to find shows that align with your brand and your expertise and, like, most importantly, your target audience.
It's all about finding the right podcast for you and your message.
Okay. Easier said than done, though, right? Like, how do we figure out which podcasts are actually the right fit? What makes one podcast a better choice than another?
That's where we get into audience alignment.
Okay.
And luckily for you, we dug up some fascinating research on that topic.
Ooh, a little bit of a cliffhanger.
A little bit.
You'll have to stay tuned for part 2 of this deep dive to hear all about that.
Definitely.
Trust me, it's worth it. So before we jumped into that other thing, we were talking about how to choose the right podcast to be a guest on.
Right.
Like, it's not as simple as just saying yes to every interview request that comes your way, right?
You got it. It's kind of like, you know, when you're fishing,
Okay.
you wouldn't just throw your line to any old pond and hope for the best.
Right.
You want to go where you know the fish are biting.
Okay. I like where you're going with this. So how do we find those, like, podcasting fishing holes?
You need to know what kind of fish you're trying to catch.
Okay.
It all starts with understanding your audience.
Okay.
Who are you trying to reach? What are they interested in? What other podcasts are they already listening to? You have to think like your ideal listener.
Right, because there's no point in being a guest on a podcast about, like, I don't know, collecting stamps.
Right.
If your target audience is all about cryptocurrency.
Exactly.
Right.
Unless there's some weird overlap there that I'm not aware of.
Yeah, hopefully not.
But you're making a really important point, which is Once you have a really clear picture of your target listener, you can start researching podcasts that align with their interests and their existing listening habits.
So we're talking like actually listening to some episodes,
Absolutely.
reading show descriptions, scrolling through the
Yeah.
social
Don't
media.
become a podcast detective.
Okay, I like it. What are we looking for in our investigation?
Well, you want to get a feel for the podcast's, I guess, vibe?
Okay.
What's the tone?
Mm.
Are they serious? Informative?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it more, humorous and off the cuff? Is it interview-based or is it a solo host? And then look for clues about their audience as well.
Yeah.
Are people commenting on their posts? Are they leaving reviews? These are all good signs that the podcast has a dedicated following.
And that's who we want to be in front of.
Exactly.
Right.
An engaged audience who's actually going to listen to what you have to say.
Exactly.
That's the goal.
Not just shouting into the void.
You don't want to waste your time on a podcast that's basically a ghost town.
Right.
You want to be part of a conversation, engage with people who are already interested and the topics that you're passionate about.
Right. And that actually reminds me of the case study we touched on earlier.
Yes.
The one with Nikki Avram.
Yes, Nikki.
Didn't she have a whole system for finding and choosing the right podcast to be a guest on?
She did. It's a fantastic example of how a strategic approach can really pay off big time.
Okay.
It's all about quality over quantity.
Okay.
She wasn't sending out generic pitches to every podcast under the sun. She had a very specific niche, a target audience in mind, and she made sure every podcast she appeared on aligned with those goals.
So it's not just about getting on any podcast. It's about finding the ones that are, like the perfect fit
Exactly.
for you and your message, and then like really maximizing that appearance.
Right. And Nikki's strategy really highlights how that initial podcast appearance can be, like the tip of the iceberg.
Okay.
It's like planting a seed that grows into this whole content ecosystem. Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good way to put it. Okay, so we've talked about the why behind like strategic podcast guesting and the where in terms of finding the right fit. Now, how do we actually get ourselves invited onto these awesome podcasts? What's the secret to getting a yes from a podcast host?
Ah, yes. The art of the pitch.
Ooh.
It's a skill in itself, but with the right approach and a little finesse, you can dramatically increase your chances of getting booked on even the most popular podcasts.
You've got me on the edge of my seat.
I bet.
Give us the inside scoop.
All right, so before the break, we were getting ready to spill the tea on crafting the perfect podcast pitch.
Yes.
I'm ready to take notes.
Okay.
What are the secrets to catching a podcast host's attention?
Well, even if you found the perfect podcast, you still need to stand out from the crowd.
Podcast hosts are bombarded with requests all the time.
It's like trying to get your demo tape on the desk of a hotshot music producer or something. You need a way to cut through all the noise.
That's a great way to put it. And just like a good demo, a strong podcast pitch starts with understanding your audience.
Wait, I thought we were done with the whole audience part.
We are, in terms of choosing the right podcast.
Yeah.
But the audience is also key to actually crafting your pitch.
Okay.
The same way that you research the podcast to see if it's a good fit.
Yeah.
The host wants to know that you've done your homework on them.
Oh, okay. So it's less like, dear podcast host, please have me on your show, and more like, I see you, I appreciate what you're doing kind of vibe.
Exactly.
Okay.
Instead of a generic message, take some time to actually personalize your pitch. Mention something specific you enjoyed about a recent episode, or a point they made that really resonated with you.
Oh, so hey, I love what you said about topic on that episode with guests.
Exactly. It really got me thinking.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Just show them that you're not just blasting out, a generic request. When you demonstrate that you understand their work and what they're trying to achieve, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so how do we actually structure the pitch itself? Should we be writing them novels or keeping things short and sweet?
Definitely short and sweet.
Okay.
Podcast hosts are busy people. They don't have time to wade through paragraphs and paragraphs of text.
That makes sense. Okay, so what's the magic formula?
Think of it like an elevator pitch.
Okay.
You've got a very short window to grab their attention and make them want to know more.
Right.
So start with a clear subject line, one that tells them exactly what you're offering.
Okay.
So, for example, instead of a vague subject like guest inquiry, try something specific like this. Your area of expertise, guest for, podcast name.
Oh, I like that. Straight to the point.
Right. And then in the body of your email, briefly introduce yourself, highlight your expertise, and explain why you'd be a good fit for their podcast in particular.
And don't forget to mention what you bring to the table, right?
That's it.
What makes you uniquely qualified to be speaking on this topic?
Yes, and here's a pro tip.
Okay.
Offer a few specific topic ideas that would really resonate with their listeners.
Oh, so we're talking less about our life stories and more about how our knowledge can actually benefit their audience.
Exactly. It shows you've done your research and that you're truly invested in making this, a win-win.
Yeah, for sure.
And finally, make it super easy for them to say yes.
Okay.
Include links to your website, your social media, and any relevant work that you've done.
It's like packaging up all the good stuff in one easy-to-access place.
Exactly.
So they don't have to go hunting for it.
Exactly. And you never know. That one podcast appearance could snowball into something amazing.
Right.
You might connect with a whole new audience, spark a collaboration, maybe even inspire a new project.
It all comes back to that ripple effect.
Yes.
One conversation can have a much bigger impact than we might realize.
And that's what's so exciting about podcasting.
Totally.
It's not just about getting your message out there. It's about connecting with people, sparking new ideas, and becoming part of a larger conversation.
Totally.
So to everyone listening, if you've been thinking about sharing your expertise, don't wait.
Yeah.
Do your research, craft your pitch, and go for it. You never know where it might lead.
I love that. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into the world of podcast guesting. We covered the why, the where, and the how. Now it's your turn to make some waves out there.